Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I am your host, Marianne Petrie. This episode of Slam the Gavel is sponsored by CPS Protect Consulting Services. Child Protective Services cases are among the most frightening experiences any parent can endure. Don't face them alone. With Urgent Assist by CPS Protect, you get the peace of mind to raise your children as you see fit and personalized assistance of their team of expert child welfare consultants, former CPS investigators themselves, right when you need it. Get started absolutely free at cpsprotect.com/register. I have a brand new guest on. I have Mark Pinsley. He is running for Auditor General. That's votemarkpinsley.com. And what the Auditor General does is they watch over all the money going in and out of the state. And the focus also will be on Health and Human Services, which is OCY, which is the equivalent of CPS, and also judicial issues. And I met Mark on a custodial interference podcast with Raella Penta. So I totally welcome you, candidate Mark Pinsley, to Slam the
Thank you very
Gavel.
much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad you are here because you have my vote already.
Thank you.
Yes.
So that's two. I have you and my wife, so that's good.
Oh, no,
At least she said she would vote for me. I did have to ask her.
oh no, she will. She will. Because I think you'll do a really good job,
Thank
especially
you.
when it comes to this Health and Human Services, which is OCY. I've had dealings with them myself, and they're very, in my opinion, very corrupt.
Yeah, I mean, I always hate the word corrupt just because you don't know
Yeah.
what it leads to. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely there's some systemic issues there for sure
Mhm.
that need to be changed. And like whether it is actual corruption or looks like corruption, obviously is hard to tell at the outset. But that's what I do as I dig in to find out exactly where the money's going and where it's being spent. And one of the problems, of course, is government. Some of the great things about government is that it does partnership with private entities,
Mhm.
and that can be very helpful. But one of the things that can also happen is it can create corruption, where when you're using an outside agency to do something for you, they can be incentivized to make sure that money continues to flow.
Mhm. Yeah, that's very concerning. The taxpayer doesn't know this.
Yeah. So I'll tell you just how this got started, maybe.
Please,
Is
yes.
because in many ways it's all new to me, within the last year.
Mhm.
It's very eye-opening, especially when you start to look at the money. And what ended up happening was I got a call. Actually, I didn't get a call. I saw a TikTok, and in the TikTok there was a lawyer there who said, "We just won a case, in Allentown."
Mhm.
Well, Allentown is near where I live, so now I'm interested. And then she said, something about children and youth. Now I'm more interested because I'm actually the controller currently in Lehigh County. And so I'm like, oh, maybe we'd be able to save some money. Like, well, what actually happened? So and I had no idea what they were talking about. So I reached out and I found out that this family had been diagnosed with Munchausen syndrome by proxy.
Mhm.
Now, I knew what Munchausen syndrome was, but I had never heard of anyone being diagnosed by it.
Mhm.
But then I was like, maybe I don't know what this is, So I looked it up and I was like, yeah, no, it is what it is. Like, it's usually the mother who's going around taking their children, and pretending like they're sick in order to make themselves feel good.
Mhm.
So I'm like, well, and like, okay, fine, maybe once in a blue moon, but certainly, even in the report that I was reading, it's like it only happens like after, or, I mean, up until the child's talking.
Mhm.
Like once the child can say, "Oh, I don't feel good," or "Yes, I feel fine," like it normally ends. And this was the case had to deal with like teenagers,
Mhm.
so it kind of surprised me. Um, and once again, like in some of these things, you're not sure, is it really a problem or is it an unfortunate soul that got caught up in like just a
Mhm.
a mess? Is this a systemic issue? Is it, as you said, corruption, or is it just a mistake? And when it's only one, like you might tend to think, hey, it's a mistake. Well, in this particular case, a mother and a father had both been diagnosed with Munchausen syndrome by proxy. So mother and the father in the same family. And I'm like, well, that's crazy. Like that just seems too odd
Mhm.
for me. So I went to a statistician. I'm like, hey, what's the chances of this happening? Like, I know it's a rare disease. Like, what were the chances of the mom and the dad, both, having Munchausen syndrome by proxy, without like, Tinder for Munchausen syndrome or something,
Yeah. Yeah.
And he actually did the math, and the math said you would be more likely to be hit by lightning twice in your lifetime. So that seems pretty unlikely.
Hmm.
And so I started digging in, and what was one family turned out to be 14 families.
Mm.
Um, and that was just shocking to me. So I went and I really did dive in. Like I was looking at their medical records to the extent that I could see them. I was looking at, anything that they had, because some of them had gone to court, and so we had court records we could look at. And so I ended up investigating the doctor, and it turned out the doctor had a similar past in New York and then also down in Florida.
Mm.
So I'm not a doctor, so I can't say whether these people had Munchausen syndrome by proxy or not, but I got data.
Mhm.
And what I was able to show was that up in Lehigh County, there was an abnormally high amount of Munchausen syndrome by proxy being diagnosed. Like we have 11% of the population of the children, and we had 40% of the Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Just doesn't make any sense.
No.
And so we investigated, and eventually I put the report out, and it went from 14 families to over 150 families. Not all with Munchausen, but with different issues. So shaken baby syndrome, with
Mhm.
some later were turned out to be fragile bone disease, just things over and over again. Like I'm dealing with a gentleman currently who's in jail
Oh.
because of this particular doctor. I dealt with two people that one went to jail for 4 months and then finally got out when his wife actually proved him innocent. And then the other one is like looking at jail time right now, like 13 years for shaken baby syndrome. And it's a young man, guy's 18 years old, has a baby that was choking. And
Mm.
he had used Life Back. I forget what it's called. It's like a plunger that goes over the face
Yeah,
for a
we have one
weekend.
of those. Yes.
Yeah, so he used the wrong size, so it covered the
Oh.
entire face.
Oh.
Plunged. Everything was fine. Milk came out, baby started breathing, things were good to go. Now, what ended up happening during that process is that the blood vessels in the eyes popped because of the pressure,
Hmm.
and the doctor said that that was shaken baby syndrome.
Oh. Yeah.
And look, there may have been more things too. And I got to be honest, like if my baby was choking, I may have shaken him or her as well, right? Like pound them
Mhm.
on the back, do whatever you can to get them
Right.
going. And the whole family was there. It wasn't like the father was there by himself. Like
Right.
the witnesses of this happening.
Hmm.
And then you see what they get caught up in. And that's how I started really getting involved in this. Um, so first off, there's foster care and kinship care.
Hmm.
And, as controller, I know that we spend about $8 million a year on foster care and kinship care. So that's an area that we need to look at, right? Because that money, so the reason I get to look at this in two ways. One is as controller, I can look at it to see what we spend. As auditor general, much of that money comes from the state, right? So the state actually helps pay for foster care and kinship care. So I can look at it from that perspective as well and see like what is happening, where is that money going, and what's being done with that money. And are people following? So normally in an audit, so like if you think about controller, the way I describe controller is we audit payroll every 2 weeks.
Hmm.
We audit our vendor payments. The Auditor General is very similar in that regard. However, you can dive in deeper. You don't just have to say, oh, are they doing the process and procedures that we contracted them with, but what else are they doing? And how are they doing it? And we can go and look at those things and see whether or not they're doing it properly or improperly. Like this is our money. These are our kids.
Hmm.
And like one of the things, so the guardian ad litem was something that pops out right away.
Oh, yeah.
And there's two problems, to be fair, right? So on the one half, we're not actually paying them enough, right? So like if you look at let's say you have a good lawyer
Hmm.
and he gets assigned or she gets assigned a child that's an hour and a half away. So that's a 3-hour trip, round trip, plus time with the child, and they are not getting paid in a way that you would get a good lawyer to go do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's a problem, because now even a good lawyer is going to say, I make more money just, staying where I am. I'll call over there and see what happens. Then there are others that like they just have their caseload is too high, and others, of course, that they're just not good lawyers, right? Like
Right.
anything. Um, and they're protected, right? They're normally protected through the judicial,
Immunity
not,
thing.
yeah, immunity, exactly. Um, so that's good and bad. Like the good news is you can get some people that are willing to do it, because if they weren't protected, they wouldn't do it at all, like good people. And the problem, of course, is like there's no review for the people that aren't doing well, which is the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because these people have impact on taking kids out
Oh,
of your
yeah.
life. And I know both. I know some good guardian ad litems that I would, if my kids were having a problem, that's the person that I would want.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, I know many that I wouldn't want. Um, and yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, what about the ones where, see, the problem that I'm seeing with other parents is that these guardian ad litems are tied to the judge.
Yes,
Judges BFFs with the opposing attorney, or they're being paid off by someone. So they're all using the same guardian ad litems to have the case do the outcome they want it to do.
yes. I mean, that is definitely a problem, right? And that's why I'm saying there's no judicial review, there's no oversight
Right.
that's actually taking a look at this. And actually just looking at outcomes too. Like, okay, so for this judge and this guardian ad litem, what are the typical outcomes? We are paying for both. We're paying for the judge and we're paying for the guardian, and we can run statistics. And like, not that statistics tell you everything, but it gives you an idea of where to look,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, oh, I see like this, I did an audit on bail. So not having nothing to do with guardian ad litems. And I found that there was 2 judges that were giving bail of $20,000 for anything. So like you stole a pencil, $20,000 bail. You stole a car, $20,000 bail.
Mm-hmm.
So now you know where to start, right? Okay, well, let's start with those 2 judges and see like, is there a reason that you're doing this?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can start to dive in deep. And one of the things about auditing, which is nice, is that once you audit the first few, other people start to correct their behavior because
Mm-hmm.
they know you're coming or
Mm-hmm.
you might be coming. And so like even here, we audit, we do spot audits in order for that to happen, to make sure that like you don't know when I'm coming. Like we don't tell you in advance, hey, I'm going to be there next week. No, we show up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we should be doing with a lot of the stuff that's going on in children and youth and in the judicial system, so that we can catch what's going on. Like I'm seeing parents, a lot of these parents now, especially in divorce cases, they're representing themselves because they don't have the money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the original divorce, both parents are paying, and then after that, one parent pays, one parent doesn't. And the judge will basically side with the parent that has the lawyer.
Right.
That's a problem,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like the fact that you can't afford a lawyer should not be held against you. Even though it might make it harder for the judge, then the judges need to be trained on how to deal with people that that don't have law degrees. I mean,
It,
it's not an easy situation for either party. I understand that, but like everything has to go towards the parent,
mm-hmm.
right? Not because you're poor or rich or whatever. It's like this is your kid.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be cautious.
And I think the judges don't even care about the best interest of the child. They really don't care. They want a non-custodial parent to pay into the system of Title IV defunding,
Hmm.
which is, I'm seeing this all the time with moms and dads. Depends on how much money they make. If they make more money, then, it depends on how that case will go. They may win their case because they make more money, or they may lose their case because they make more money because that judge knows they can extract Title 4D funding from that parent for child support.
Yes. Yeah. So what I would say, because I'm always cautious in pointing fingers, what I would say is it's the easier path
Mm.
for the judge. Right.
Uh-huh.
Like sometimes that's the problem is like, it's not necessarily that they care who wins or who loses or the best interest. It's like, okay, what's easiest for me is this,
Hmm.
whatever this is in that particular case. And so like, that's how I look at it. And then of course I do look at outside. So where does that money go?
Hmm.
Um, because a lot of times the outside provider in some cases has influence,
Hmm.
right? Either because they become friends or because, they took care of a child that the judge cared about in particular, and they did a good job. And now I have a good feeling about that provider. And so I'm happy to give that provider more business, if you will, which is dangerous. I mean, I want the child going to the right provider, but it's still dangerous to have a relationship like that.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a big mess. People say judges need more training. I think these judges know what they're doing, in my opinion. They know exactly what they're doing. And I think there are good family court judges, but they're few and far between. I just think they should just abolish family court and CPS.
Interesting. Yeah. I don't have an opinion on that. I mean, CPS was a good idea. It's
Yeah,
right. Like it was a good idea that has gone wrong.
right.
Like, so for example, I met this woman, maybe 4 weeks ago. She was a young mother.
Mm.
She herself grew up in a, terrible household. Um, and she didn't know how to make like lunches for her kids. Like, so CPS was involved in her life, right?
Oh,
And she got a good caseworker. And this caseworker like took her out, showed her how to shop
mm,
and like how to make a lunch for her kid. Now you could say, well, the community should have helped her with that. But I think there's an argument for that, right? Like the community should have helped her. Um, but they didn't, or she didn't ask the community. I don't know what happened.
mhm.
But nevertheless, like for her, CPS was good. Like they weren't coming to take her children. Whoops, sorry about that. So in her case, like it was good. It was, and there are other cases like that that I have seen,
Mhm.
where, CPS isn't coming to take your child, they're coming to help.
Mhm.
Um, the problem is when they're not there to help, or when they're there, and the caseworker had a bad day or they had a bad experience in the previous house, and now they're taking that out on the next house, maybe not even on purpose.
Mhm.
So I do think that there needs to be if we don't get rid of it, we need a revamping. There are skills and things that are required in our communities that are needed,
Mhm.
that the community itself is not providing.
Right. I mean, if you're going to revamp them, they all should have psychology degrees in not only child abuse, physical, sexual, but especially child psychological abuse.
Yes, I
Not
agree.
trained in that. They don't.
No, they're training like neglect issues for the most part, right? Like,
Mhm.
and that's neglect comes in a lot of forms, right? So I see cases where, we go out because the child just isn't taking care of, or the parent isn't taking care of the child's teeth. Um, well, it's because they have no money,
Mhm.
like, and or their parents never told them to go to the dentist.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of that out there, like, where you have especially young parents
Mhm.
who their parents were addicts or whatever their issues were. So they just never learned,
Right. Right.
right? And there's got to be some way to get help. And if it's not the government, then it certainly needs to be, some outside agency. I have no problem with it being the government, but it has to be, as you said, it has to be formed in a way that it's helpful and is not geared towards taking children away from their family.
Mhm. Mhm. I was talking to one mother where, and this was, I believe, down south. This was a couple years ago we had talked, and she had a caseworker remove the children because she had made a comment to dad because she had just cleaned the floors, and dad came in after fishing and he threw his boots on the floors that she just cleaned. And she says, and in joking, I'm going to kill you if you do that again, but the kid went into school worried that this was going to happen. So the teacher found out about it and
Yeah.
called CPS, and those two kids were removed. As they were being removed, the kids were crying, and the CPS caseworker says, "Toughen up, Buttercup."
Oh my God.
Yeah. So this is what we're dealing with, a low, inept mentality of caseworkers that need to go.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And what I will say, for the caseworker, I don't know how to put this, but um, in many cases, not all, in many cases, I believe it's a management issue, right? And what I mean by that is, if you're a good manager, you don't hire the people that do that,
Mhm.
right? And so part of the problem is what has happened, of course, is, who gets to become manager? Well, typically the caseworker maybe that was there the longest, or the caseworker that most agrees with the current manager. And so they promote that person. And rather than promoting based on real merit and on how well that person did, now you've got someone there who doesn't know how to manage,
Mhm.
and maybe was never trained in management, quite frankly.
Mhm.
And so now they're hiring the new caseworkers, right? And so when they hire the new caseworkers, maybe they hire them for personality, or maybe they hire, who knows? They're not hiring them for the skill set, and they're not, and maybe they're keeping them too long too, right? So, oh, I'm down, so we're down 9 caseworkers right now. But if I had a caseworker that was bad, if I'm a manager and I have a caseworker that's bad, I'll be down 10,
Mhm.
right? I'm not going to keep that caseworker. I'll be down 11. I'll start. I would rather be down and figure and triage my cases than I am to keep a case that can go awry. And
Mhm.
so one of the issues right now, of course, is the caseworkers, at least here in Pennsylvania, fall under SEIU. So that's the union that the caseworkers are
Mhm.
in. I believe that the caseworkers actually get sort of the brunt of the problems, where above SEIU, above the caseworker, are those managers. And like, if those managers were better, the caseworkers would be better. Now, I come at this, by the way, is like, I used to be a vice president of sales and marketing at a billion-dollar company managing, multi-million-dollar budgets. So I have a lot of experience in hiring and firing, and especially on the firing side.
Yeah.
Right. And so I have a strong belief that leadership matters.
Mhm.
Um, and like, unfortunately, at least in Pennsylvania, the way that leadership comes is it's in 67 different counties. We
Oh.
have 67 different leaders. And when DHS at the state level is looking at it, they're not looking to see, like, they're looking for very high level numbers. We give you X number of dollars. Are you doing X amount of work? They're not looking at it and seeing outcomes. They're not going in and talking to families to
Mhm.
see what's happening. And you can spot check that way, right? Let me just find, 5 family names. I'm going to call them and see what happened.
Mhm.
And I mean, that's what I would do, right? If I have the office, like,
Mhm.
I intend to dive in deeper. These things are too important. The
Right.
judicial system is too important.
Well, I was interviewing Mark and Terry Stamen of LetOurChildrenGo.org, and
Yep.
he was saying, just abolish CPS, utilize the police, because really, when they come at you for emotional abuse charges,
Yep.
I, they're weaponizing this system. And as you know, you've got people making multiple, phone calls to
Calls.
CPS just at the expense of taxpayer dollars.
Yeah.
So I think, if you know of a kid getting beat up down the road, then notify the police. And I also think you should give your name. If you have,
Yes, yeah, I agree with that.
yeah,
Yeah,
because I tried to find out who had made two back-to-back indications on me, and I basically figured it out, but they would not tell me. And the head of human services said that I had called or emailed him, and he said they should be able to tell you who had made these phone calls. Well, they refused to do that.
yeah, yeah. I know. I mean, the problem is, I get both sides of it, but well, I agree with I agree with the gentleman that you had on earlier, which is there's a so where we disagree perhaps is like abolishing CPS, but I'll come back to that. I do agree that people it's like people used to call 911 for their dogs,
Right.
right? That's the wrong place to go, right? And where you should go is the police. I mean,
Hmm.
not for your dog, but for the cases like where someone's hurting their child on a regular basis.
Hmm.
I agree with that. Where I'm concerned about abolishing CPS is more like the stuff that I just told you about, right? Like where you can actually help a person get to a better level with their child. You're not in there to tell the parents that they're doing a bad job, right? You're in there to
Right.
be like, oh, here are some things that we can do better. Oh, you have an anger management issue. Do you want to deal with that? Do you want to deal with that?
Hmm.
Not that you're harming your child.
Right.
Maybe you're scaring your child, right?
Yeah.
Whatever. Um, there's a lot of people that are open to, help of some kind or another that would make our society better. But like when children and youth or other organizations go in, so like one of the issues that I have, for example, is since we do have children and youth or CPS, when I started my investigation, I had a 16-year-old.
Hmm.
Um, and I knew that if the doctor that I was, reporting on or the hospital that I was reporting on wanted to, they could report me, that I was abusing my child, and then I would be caught up in an organization that I'm investigating. And
Hmm.
that's not going to go well for me,
Hmm.
right? Of course. And one of the biggest areas that I was concerned about was the schools, right?
Hmm.
Because they are the number one reporters, because they have to report. And I've seen reports where, the child has bruising on their calves. And depending on who you get, it depends on how far they progress. But a lot of like I've seen the bruising on the calves where a lot of times what it is like that kid is of learning how to ride a bicycle age,
Hmm.
right? And they're bruising their calves, as they're going, or
Right.
they fall off the bike and their knees are all scuffed up. Um, and so the problem that I have with the schools, and I went to the schools to complain about this, is like, look, I have no problem with you reporting. I know that's the law. I'm not trying to stop you from doing your legal duty. However, you have a duty beyond picking up that phone. The
Hmm.
duty is to make sure that CPS is actually doing the right thing for these children. So if they are finding bruised calves and it's riding a bicycle thing, that the parents and family are not getting caught up in this.
Hmm.
And so I feel that, large organizations like schools, like hospitals, all of these major reporting issues have a responsibility to the community to be, at this moment, overseeing children and youth until such time as we do a better job.
Yeah, I agree. I remember I think I was in a store Target many couple years ago with my sister-in-law, and it
Yeah,
was the dead of winter in February. And as we were parking the car, I saw a woman walk in. One kid that was probably 4 had a coat on, winter coat, and it looked like the 2 to 3 year old. He was just in a t-shirt, and it was like 22 degrees. So
yeah,
when we got in there, I kindly whispered to her. I said, "He needs a coat." And
yeah.
then what happened next was she continued to follow me and my sister-in-law around, screaming at me to leave her alone, and all these things. It's like, all I'm saying, it's like she wouldn't stop. And my sister-in-law says, "I'm never taking you into another store again."
Yeah, I mean, you're trying to do the right thing. You're
Yeah.
not trying to put them in an awkward position, and then they respond in a terrible way, right?
Right, right. And then there
Yeah,
was the story recently where a child was brought into Walmart with barely any clothes on, and a Walmart worker, put some clothes over the child. and
Yeah.
the mother became belligerent, and the Walmart worker called CPS, and then the Walmart worker proceeded to get fired.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
So something has to be done with these people. You know, I don't know what to say.
I mean,
I
everything, the problem is it's a systemic issue, right?
Mhm.
So beyond the fact that there may be corruption, is typically which is done by the private entities on the inside, on the government side, a lot of times it's a system. So for example, one of the things that I found with this doctor that was overdiagnosing Munchausen syndrome,
Mhm.
well, internally, we never looked for a second opinion, right? So we would have one doctor, she says Munchausen syndrome, then we take the children away. Maybe not that quick, but that's the gist.
Mhm.
Um, had we said, okay, we're going to go out to another doctor outside of the same network, right? So that she's not friends with any of the doctors in the network.
Mhm.
We would go to another network and an expert in whatever the issue is. So if the kid's got a bloody eye, you take them to an ophthalmologist, not to a child abuse pediatrician,
Right.
right? And like, had we had that system in place, it would have stopped this from happening. Instead, our system allowed it to happen,
Mhm.
which is why I'm also about changing the system and making sure we look at the systems for those kind of, checks and balances to make sure that we actually can fix this. Because in some cases, it's a small fix, right? Like that could have, like what we could have done there would have been a small fix. It's not even a band-aid. It's actually a fix. And then in other cases, like you really need to dig in and look deeper and see what's going on. And I'm a big believer in bringing outside organizations in, especially if you can find like a good educational, like a university that studies whatever it is that you're trying to change. So if you're trying to change children and youth, that studies children and youth so they understand what the issues are,
Mhm.
and that they're looking from the children from like the moment they get involved with the system to completion, after and after, right? Like, do they get stuck in the system again a year later? So
Mhm.
somebody studies that, right? There are different universities that study that. You bring them in and say, like, well, okay, where are the major uh, areas that we need to look at to make sure this isn't happening to our children? It
Mhm.
costs a lot of money to foster a child, for us to pay for fostering children.
Right.
Um, and I'm not saying it's not money well spent if the child needs it, but that's the big if.
Mhm. Yeah, a
And if
lot. Oh,
yeah,
go
yeah, I'm
ahead.
sorry. No, I'm saying, and of course, if the foster care parents are good, and like all the things going down the line.
Mhm. I see, and also I have also found that these foster parents aren't even vetted. You don't know if they have a criminal background. Did they do, and this is other states, that,
Yeah,
were they given a child abuse clearance, look at? Did they do fingerprinting and state police background checks? And, Pennsylvania, I believe, does all this. Because when I was a nurse, we had to have child abuse clearances done and the fingerprinting and the state police background. But states like North and South Carolina, they are just willy-nilly, all these other states as well, just hiring people and putting these kids in with criminals.
yeah, and that's completely wrong. I mean, yeah. I mean, like I even know here, like I know we do a better job at that, but I also think we have like X number of hours of training that you have to have every year. But you can basically pick your training, so if you want to do 12 hours of training on name the item,
Mhm.
you can just use all those hours on that one thing rather than like really becoming educated in different areas. So
Mhm.
maybe do 12 hours on CPR and
Mhm.
that's it versus, okay, like what are some of the issues that you are dealing with your kid, with the kids that you're fostering?
Mhm. Well, and as you said, watching the money that goes in and out, these foster parents are, what is it, 4,000 per child if they have a foster child? So that means, and I've heard from other interviews I've done, they refer to these kids as their Denali payments.
Oh, is that right? I've never heard that,
Yes.
but
Yes.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can see that, right? Like anything, there's always going to be people that want to cheat the system. Um, and there will always be good people too.
Mhm.
right? And like, and that's the hard thing, is trying to weed out the bad people. Because there are, I mean, like I know several families that foster. In fact, one of them adopted the kids. And it's a really good family. They actually never took the money from the system. Like, so they never took any of the money. They were just foster parents.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it can work. Sometimes.
Do you think if you just took out the money, would these parents really want to be foster parents?
It's a good question. So the family that I know that did it, they didn't need the money, right? They could afford to do it without the money. The other ones, like I think every case is different, right? In some cases, you're willing to foster a child, but you at least need to make sure that you don't have any new costs,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that, I mean, obviously, right? And then there are other cases where I think you're absolutely right that if it wasn't paying something that they could use for themselves, then they wouldn't do it at all. And,
Right.
and like those are the people to get rid of, right? Like,
Mhm.
and those are the people that are hard to get rid of.
Oh, yes. Yes. And you've got these other caseworkers that are working in tandem with these courthouses
Yes.
to latch themselves onto a case to remove a child. I mean, this could be, we'll say, a family court case to remove a child from a good, healthy, loving, fit parent in order to go along with a false narrative and get that parent paying the Title 4D.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I'm always I always look at the receiver of the funds,
Mhm.
right? Because that's where the most corruption can occur. Um, and like, oh, are you friends with the receiver of the funds? You know, or
Mhm.
why does it happen? So, for example, here we have we have therapists that we send the families to in some cases, and we may ask the therapist for a diagnosis. For example, in the Munchausen cases, does this person have Munchausen syndrome by proxy? Yes or no? So we'll send them to the therapist. We pay for that session. So if you want, you can go off on your own, but you have to pay yourself. Or if you go to our person, we'll pay for you. So of course you're incentivized to use our person.
Mhm.
So then the therapist will be like, oh yes, you have Munchausen syndrome by proxy. And by the way, you need to have 10 sessions with me.
Mm.
That's where I have a huge problem,
Mhm.
right? Like, so I'm like, okay, well, if we want that person to diagnose, then they can't treat. They
Mm.
can't have the 10 sessions. It has to go somewhere else. This way you don't have even the appearance, right, of something that can go to me, like that's when you get into like, is that corrupt? Is that
Yeah,
corrupt? Because that
like a
seems corrupt.
conflict of interest, collusion.
Yeah, exactly. And then by the way, maybe they're friends. Like maybe the
Yes.
caseworker, right? And so they're like, yeah, yeah, I'll send you another kid your way. And they're not really, maybe there's no corruption in their mind, but it's definitely their friends, like
Mhm.
they trust them to do the job that they want them to do.
Right.
Uh, and sometimes, and sometimes I think it's even, and not often, but sometimes I think it's for the good. There's sort of a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours,
Mhm.
where let's say, for example, a caseworker sees a really bad case
Mhm.
and they can't get the child out for whatever reason. There's a bunch of times when you can't get the child out because the parent does know their rights, but this parent is a drug addict and the parent's doing bad things and all this kind of stuff. And so then the caseworker goes back to someone who they know they've given business to. And they're like, hey, can you help me get this child out? And they will.
Mhm. But
Um,
why don't they call the police?
it's a good question. I don't have an answer.
Yeah, I know, like we were talking about custodial interference, that's how I met you. And
Yep.
I know law enforcement, these laws have been on the books for 40 years, but they have never been trained on it at the police academy. Lawyers
Yep.
aren't trained on custodial interference laws either. And I never knew this existed when my ex would not show up at visits that I was supposed to have the kids. Had I only known to file an offense report with the state police.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is also, I don't mean to change gears, but
No, please. Yeah, this is good.
the custodial interference thing is huge because, people will say, well, okay, so they got the kid. I don't get to see my kid. I'm going to call CPS and I'm going to have them do a welfare check.
Yep.
And then you're wasting taxpayer dollars on something that, yes, you're being cheated out of seeing your child, but the state police needs to be notified because this is a felony.
Absolutely. And like, I mean, I agree with you. Like there are things that we need to do. Um, there's just things that we need to do that we can do better.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, I understand that problem, right? Like it's just they get once they get involved, it's almost impossible to get them out,
Right.
right? When you get children and youth involved, um, it just goes on and on. It's just never ending, and it becomes a major problem. And you're right. Like there's a point at which you could get the police involved. Unfortunately, a lot of times it's like it's only if they're in imminent danger,
Right.
right? It's like that imminent danger word is kind of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because look, not everything is imminent, but they're still in danger, right? Like they still need to be helped in some form or fashion. People are knocking at my door. I may have to go soon. I
Oh,
apologize.
that's okay. I won't keep you all day. I'm going to have you back on.
Oh,
So,
that'd be great. I would love to.
so when is the election?
So the election is, I think it's April 23rd is the primary. So the first step is I have to get past the primary. So anything that your listeners can do to help me, I would appreciate it. Like vote.
Definitely. I'm voting for you. I always show up. I don't send in a ballot. My butt is in there voting physically. And yeah, so we're gonna have to continue this conversation. I don't want to keep you all morning, but don't
No, I
don't
could go forever. There's no
oh,
doubt
we
about it.
will. Yeah. But hey, don't jump off. Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in these family courtrooms. I'm your host, Marianne Petrie, author of Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough, and Cry Out for Justice, Poems of Truth, and Raised by These Wolves, How Family and Federal Courts Are Failing Our Children. Please join us again here in the future with Mark Pinsley. You can find me on Spotify, YouTube, Apple iTunes, Anchor FM, iHeartRadio, and platforms I don't know about. And please feel free to buy me a coffee to keep these podcasts going. Thank you, candidate Mark Pinsley.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
You'll be back.
I sure will.